History of tourism.
The history of travel and tourism helps us in understanding how developments in the past have had an influence on the present day tourism. Furthermore, knowledge of how tourism is developing in the present time will help us plan in a better manner for the future. For the early man, the term travel was not associated with the words pleasure or leisure as it is today. The word travel has originated from the word travail, meaning painful or laborious. The word holidays can be said to have its origin from holy days or a time to relax and rejoice, to be spent in celebrating festivals in the honor of our guardian saints.
People have always moved from one place to another for a variety of reasons. Early travel was undertaken mainly for the purpose of trade, waging wars, and conquering new lands, or for pilgrimages. The objective of a pilgrimage or religious travel was to perform rituals to appease God and deities or other sacred powers for wish fulfillment, or to purify the body, or for material or spiritual betterment. Pilgrimages and travel for treatment at natural springs or spas was gaining popularity in the mid-17th century when doctors advocated the healing powers of mineral water. They soon became important meeting places for the gentry or elite. Travel for leisure dawned in the 19th century, and tourism as a profession was born in the beginning of that century. The business of tourism can be traced back to the transport revolution that occurred around the same time as the Second World War. In its early stage, travel was a luxury available to the privileged class as transport costs were very high. Today, tourism is a full-fledged industry very much within the reach of the common man. In this chapter, we shall discuss the historical development of tourism through the centuries, ranging from early civilizations, the imperial era, European Renaissance, the industrial era, the impact of world wars on modern tourism. Early civilizations. Very little is known about the prehistoric period between 40,000 BC and 10,000 BC, as no written records exist. The earliest archaeological records depict westward movements of the Cro-Magnon man into Europe. Cave paintings around 20,000 BC in Lascaux are evidence of the existence of the Cro-Magnon man in modern-day France. Apart from traveling in search of food or to save one's skin, wanderlust could also have been one of the reasons for undertaking travel by the prehistoric man. Civilizations developed around 10,000 BC to 8,000 BC in the Neolithic period, when people began living together and developed settlements. Instead of constantly moving about in search of food, man started using his intelligence and took control over nature. Civilizations were also developing simultaneously in India, China, and Egypt. Since man did not have to wander in search of food, he could use his time to develop other skills. Trade began amongst various settlements, and the need for better transportation was felt. Travel on horseback began and was popular with a military movement to acquire land and conquer tribes. By 5000 BC, water transportation in the form of rafts and canoes propelled by poles or paddles were developed for use in rivers, lakes, and streams. The development of the wheel around 3500 to 3000 BC by the Sumerians, ancient inhabitants of southern Mesopotamia, was a major landmark in the travel industry. Carts driven by oxen were used to carry goods and people. Later, around 1000 to 500 BC, roads were constructed for chariots, wagons, and carriages. Roads and carriages helped both in trade and war. In 3200 BC, Egyptians developed sailboats which were used for trade, conquest, and exploration. The Phoenicians developed the first merchant fleets in 1000 BC, which sailed along the coastline for trade with Spain. Sails and oars were used for navigation. The advent of civilization created a basis for tourism in the following ways. The concept of the word home emerged in the communities in a particular area where people lived together. It was in these communities that culture evolved. Different communities across the globe exhibited cultural diversity. Craftsmen produced goods which were traded. Invention of the wheel around 3500 to 3000 BC paved the way for future transportation of goods and people. Bricks were used for construction work. The Sphinx and all major pyramids were built between 2800 BC and 2175 BC by Egyptian pharaohs. In Asia, India was the most developed region, and the Indus Valley civilization was the earliest civilization recorded in 3000 BC during the Iron Age, followed by the Vedic period in 2000 BC. The excavations of Mohenjo-daro in Sindh and Harappa in Punjab are ample evidence of that era. Remains of modern cities with well-developed houses, streets, drainage systems, common baths, and large courtyards have been unearthed. Seals of trade in terracotta have been found in Mohenjo-daro, which is evidence that people indulged in trade. Merchants traveled in groups in caravans consisting of carriages drawn by horses and oxen to protect themselves from wild beasts and bandits. The creation and adoption of Vedic scriptures such as the great epic Mahabharata and establishment of temples attracted many students, showing evidence of religious travel during the early Vedic period. The first crude Grand Trunk routes were created, and travel for military purpose and administration in addition to trade and commerce was undertaken. The advent of civilization created one of the most important reasons for travel, and it was during this period that the first signs of tourism industry were visible. Inns appeared at prominent centers of trade to offer hospitality to the weary trader. After gaining control over nature and forming settlements, the desire to acquire assets and exert control over others developed. The worth of a civilization was measured in terms of its power to control others. Imperial Era. Tourism was established during the early empires of Egypt, Persia, Rome, China, and India. Road networks were laid for travelers, transport was made available, accommodation was provided for the traveler and the beast of burden, wells were dug for water, and security pickets were set up. Apart from traveling for trade, aristocrats traveled in style, carrying provision, water, animal and luggage and servants along with them to enjoy the comforts of their home away from home. The Roman Empire took over Sicily in 241 BC and thereafter witnessed the greatest period of growth, while Julius Caesar was in power in the last 100 years BC. Road systems with bridges and aqueducts built for military purposes became an excellent tourism infrastructure for the Romans and were used for trade and pleasure tourism. The Romans were the first to pave road gravel of 80,000 kilometer length from 100 BC to 400 AD, while Paved roads appeared in Europe only after 1700 AD. In 400 BC, the Greeks expanded the merchant fleets and developed two-mast vessels with four sails. 300 ports were formed for trade along the Mediterranean, the Black, and the Caspian Seas. Barges were developed to transport goods. Speed over the land and sea was slow and expensive as food and shelter were not available en route. With the advent of road networks, resting places and food were provided along these routes. Wealthy Greek and Romans traveled to Athens, Rome, and other cities to participate in or observe and perform in sporting competitions and other art events. Some traveled to the oracles to pay homage to the numerous gods. Travelers from all over the world were attached to the festival held in the honor of the gods. The Olympic Games were held in Olympia, Greece, once in 4 years in honor of god Zeus. Athletes from all over the vast Greek Empire participated in this mega event. The concept of guides has its origin in Greece. Native guides were hired to escort tourists for sightseeing. Food, gambling, and dancing to entertain travelers have been part of the Greek hospitality. The Roman Empire was prosperous and pleasure-loving. Inns were built, and the business of renting various modes of transport, such as horses and carts, began to pick up. Tourism developed further during the period. Spectator sports, such as gladiatorial contests, were organized to overcome boredom. Pilgrimage, sightseeing, and health tourism in the form of bathing in mineral springs were popular activities. During this period, travel had a new dimension and was recognized as a meaningful social activity. The importance of leisure was recognized as mentioned in the writings of Plato and Aristotle. Apart from the Greek and Roman civilizations, other sophisticated civilizations were being established, contributing significantly to modern tourism. The Pacific Islands were being explored, and Mayan civilizations were spreading throughout Central America and Mexico. Extensive road networks were being built by the Mayans to connect their centers of civilizations. The famous ruins of Chichen Itza and Tikal have observatories, temples, and sports fields and attract millions of tourists. Tourists also throng to the temple of Chichen Itza during the vernal and autumnal equinox to observe the snake deity descend from the top of the temple and connect with its head at the base. These centers indicate that science, religion, and leisure were important aspects of Mayan life. Unlike the Western civilizations that believed in extending their territories by conquering land, the Chinese civilization preferred to live within a set space and constructed the Great Wall of China as a defensive structure to keep away foreign invaders. India's wealth and rich treasures were exposed to the Western world only after the Persian and Macedonian invasions in India. Apart from travel for military purposes and acquiring new territories, travel for trade and commerce expanded and new geographic routes were developed. The Mauryan Emperor Ashoka was responsible for the spurt in the development of formal travel facilities. He established schools, hospitals, and monasteries, which also served travelers. The Grand Trunk routes were improved further. Trees were planted along roadways. Rest houses were constructed along the Grand Trunk routes for the comfort of the travelers. In India, the royalty traveled for pleasure and developed summer retreats away from the heat and the dust. Milestones or cosminars speak about the travel culture during the Mughal rule. Caravanserais or walled rest houses were developed as trade tours became popular. Emperor Akbar established schools and colleges with boarding facilities known as madrasas to provide education to children. Education was another major reason for travel during this period. There was an increase in international trade and additional ports were developed. Before the Industrial Revolution, travel for leisure was the privilege of the upper class of society only. Leisure travel, which is undertaken by the masses today, was unknown to the working class. The Silk Route. The Silk Road or the Silk Route was a major trade route for caravans carrying silk and other luxury items from China to India and the Middle East. It began as early as 2000 BC and flourished during the Kushan Empire from 15 AD to 200 AD. The Kushan emperors opened and protected the Silk Road. It is the important link in the movement of people from the east to the west to exchange silk, muslin, porcelain, tea, rice, and spices, or for the purpose of trade. Silk, spices, and ointments left Indian ports in ships bound for the Roman Empire. This trading gave the travelers an experience of present tourism, that is, seeing new places, cultures, interacting with people, exchanging ideas, and learning new processes. In spite of the hazardous route, travel was undertaken and profits were high. It was only in the 1400 to 1500 AD that navigation improved and longer voyages were undertaken with the manufacture of ships with rudder, triangular sails, and mariner's compass. Canals were built in the late 18th century to link major manufacturing centers so that bulk material could be easily transported. Water transportation was eventually taken over by the railways from 1840 onwards. European Renaissance. The Renaissance was a great cultural movement that began in Italy in early 1300 AD and spread to England, France, Germany, Spain, and other countries in the late 1400s and ended around 1600 AD. The Renaissance, or rebirth, was a period of change and revival of the Greek and Roman cultures. Renaissance artists wanted to portray people and nature realistically and stressed on the beauty of the human body. The famous works of art of Italian artists Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael inspired the Grand Tour, and even today, these artistic accomplishments attract tourists to Europe. The Grand Tour was a tour of the principal cities and places of interest in Europe, the focus of the tour being cultural enrichment, and the duration of the tour was generally 3 years. Superior hotels and services made their appearance during this period in some of the major cities of Europe such as Paris, Milan, and Rome. In 1640 AD, horse-drawn coaches were used to transport people and goods from one city to another over long distances. The stagecoach was a popular mode of road travel amongst the elite. As the journey was completed in stages, the wagon was called a stagecoach. Teams of pack horses were used to transport heavy goods, while stagecoaches carried the rich. In 1720, Turnpike Trust was set up to charge toll and to maintain the roads which were in a poor state. Modern-day grand tours are also undertaken after the last year of schooling and are an enriching experience of exploring the way of life and prevalent cultures of other countries. They are exclusively educational tours. The Industrial Era. The only source of energy in the pre-industrial times was human or animal power, which was replaced by steam power in the industrial era, created by burning coal as a source of power. The Industrial Revolution, which occurred in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, was a period when major changes occurred in agriculture, manufacturing, and transportation. It started in Britain and subsequently spread throughout the world. The manual, labor-based economy began to be replaced by one dominated by machinery. One of the first products of the Industrial Revolution to affect tourism was the development of the steam engine. Steam engines were used in the industries for manufacturing and also for transportation. Steam-powered ships and railways hastened the speed of travel. People migrated to towns to work in factories. Rail locomotive with a steam engine was used for transport of passengers and goods in 1825 to 1830 AD. Rail travel initiated the first form of mass travel, as a large number of people could be moved out at a relatively low cost. In 1841, Thomas Cook, the pioneer travel agent, organized a special train to carry 570 passengers from Leicester to Loughborough to attend a meeting. In 1843, he took nearly 3,000 school children on a trip from Leicester to Derby. He introduced the concept of chartered transport and package tours, which resulted in a spurt in pleasure travel. People began to travel to visit pleasure spots like beaches and spas. Advent of technology. Automobiles with internal combustion engines were developed in 1860 AD. The invention of the automobile and their mass production in 1903 is regarded as a technological advancement which allowed people to move at their will. It is the most widely used form of transportation in terms of passenger miles as compared to any other form of transportation. Henry Ford launched the people's car, the Ford Model T, in 1908. Also known as the Tin Lizzie, it was comparatively low-priced, economical, and changed the face of travel worldwide. An extensive network of roads was laid and food and lodging facilities were developed on main routes. The present-day motels and hotels were evolved from these early tourist routes of 1920s and 1930s. The Industrial Revolution was a great turning point in the history of the world, which gave people the time and money to travel. Also, the great disposable income led to the formation of a middle class in society. It is this middle class who constitute the majority of tourists today. Before the First World War, the privileged class of society led an enviable lifestyle with ample servants, comforts, and plenty of leisure time. The opulence and grandeur of the luxury liners which crossed the Atlantic in those days was unmatched in terms of services and comforts offered to passengers, and even surpassed those services offered by many of the finest resorts of today. The Quaker City journey was the first transatlantic pleasure party voyage. Transatlantic cruises received a setback when the luxury ocean liner Titanic struck an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean and sank in 1912 with only 711 out of its 2,224 passengers surviving the tragedy. Air travel has its origin in the use of the hot air balloon by the French in 1783. The Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur, succeeded in sailing their prototype airplane in December 1903 near Kitty Hawk, North Carolina in the USA. The plane flew above 120 feet at about 48 kilometers per hour. Air travel became commercial in 1919, shortly after the First World War, offering daily flights between London and Paris. Impact of the World Wars. The end of the First World War ushered in prosperity throughout Europe and the USA. This period is called the Roaring Twenties as wealth and leisure time were in abundance. Pleasure travel and luxury liners regained popularity. There were marked improvements in automobile transportation and infrastructure, and camping grounds with lodging facilities became very popular. Resorts were developed along beaches, mountains, and lake areas near major cities, and people had the leisure time and money to indulge in pleasure tourism. While measures to restore the economy were still in process, the Second World War was declared in 1939. After the war, the industry shifted to the production of consumer goods. This marked the beginning of the consumer age. Growing industrialism and prosperity led to mass tourism. Modern tourism. The cost of air transportation and travel time was reduced with the use of jet engines and larger aircrafts by 1958. The airline industry has steadily grown from a single-engine airplane to the first jumbo jet Boeing 747 in 1970 to the first supersonic passenger plane. Such rapid growth of the airline industry has made air travel affordable to the masses, consequently accelerating the growth of travel and tourism. Tourism, both domestic and international, is growing at a rapid pace in India too. The air transport network is expanding with new players entering the competition, and airports with modern facilities are being constructed in major cities. The modern day tourist thus evolved from the explorer, the farmer, the merchant, the pilgrim, the conqueror, the student, the worker, and the cure seeker. Knowledge about the development of tourism over the ages is essential for tourism professionals to understand and plan tourism for the future.
The present tourism industry is an outcome of various historical events which occurred worldwide. Travel developed from the need to survive, the desire to expand trade, and the quest to conquer new lands. The driving forces behind the development of tourism were an innate curiosity about the world and a desire to escape from the routine. People travelled on foot in search of food and shelter and moved on when food supplies were exhausted. Various modes of transportation developed gradually to travel on land, on water, and tourism has thus evolved from the early man travelling for survival to the modern man travelling for business or leisure in comfort and safety. Thank you.